And Kenyan President William Ruto has withdrawn planned tax hikes. That's as he bows to pressure from protesters. Rallies across the country over the past week have resulted in 23 deaths and left scores of demonstrators wounded. But the move may not be enough. Some protesters have indicated on social media that rallies will continue until Ruto resigns. The International Monetary Fund says that it's closely monitoring the situation and is deeply concerned about the unrest. And Aly-Khan, Satchu, CEO of Rich Management, joins us from Kenya with the detail. Aly-Khan, thank you so much for your time and good afternoon.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm wondering, just from a calm perspective, is today a better day there in Kenya and the streets?
Yes, so far it seems it's a little bit quieter. I think yesterday was very dramatic. Caught a lot of people off guard because initially these rallies had been organic, grassroots, and there hadn't been any sort of violence of any sort. In fact, everybody was commending the protesters for the way they were handling themselves. So I think yesterday was a bit of a sticker shock, and today's a little bit calmer.
With that said, I really want to just take stock of some of the provisions of this finance bill that really had protesters, citizens pushing back, Aly-Khan.
So I think, it really is a culmination of things. We had this massive debt load, which meant we're carrying a great deal of debt and very high interest payments. And, the president reached out, got support from the multilaterals like the IMF and the World Bank, very much pivoted west, as can be seen by his visits to the G7, for example. But I think something has gone wrong in the sense that either the multilaterals or the president's team were not on top of how much a burden the citizen is prepared to take. The so-called Laffer curve. There reaches a point when you can't tax people anymore. And I think somehow or other we've reached that trigger. That trigger went off. You had this very spontaneous reaction by Gen Z that really made a great deal of strides. I think he's got to revisit the tax situation and do it pretty quickly.
Aly-Khan, is it possible that President William Ruto's strategy to make Kenya a global player, making sure that those relationships with the West are very strong, is also being seen as a bit of maybe an issue worth pushing back on, and that maybe there was a little bit of getting carried away in that pursuit?
I think that's a very interesting question, and I think that's one of the issues that has popped up in that the president has been seen to be globetrotting, being feted at the highest fora. And I think the citizens have felt that they've been distanced from him and that the challenges they're facing deserve more attention than the president might be allowing at this moment in time. I think the other thing that's backfired a lot is, people are genuinely feeling it's very expensive. The cost of living is much higher than what's being reported. And I think some of the ostentatiousness about the current administration has struck the entirely wrong note. And in that sense, I think the president would do well, to look at who's writing his speeches to be more conciliatory. I noticed that in the last 48 hours. I think that's really important. You can't alienate such an enormous constituency and expect to govern without much trouble. I think that's really important. And then I think you've just got to look at this tax situation. You've got to knock a few heads together. You've got to tell the IMF and the World Bank, we've hit the limit. It's not going to work like this. We've got to revisit the entire economic plan. Because make no mistake, a lot of it has been hatched in Washington.
Another one that's also interesting here, allegations that there were some bad actors here within the protesters, people who used the situation to really be mischievous. I think the word treasonous was also thrown around here. Are those allegations founded?
Yes, I do think so. Obviously, that comment of mine is speculative, but, we had a clear trend change yesterday. Until yesterday, we had really collaboration. We had a very 21st century protest type movement. It was defiant. I saw videos of people approaching policemen, but it was respectful. And I think, you know, in order to throw shade on the protesters, we definitely had some kind of something was afoot yesterday. You know, that sort of violence that we saw, the response, the state response, was something that was extreme and outside the bounds of what we'd previously seen. So I think, you know, that risk of infiltration is high, yes.
Well, that said, William Ruto, the president, has gone on to say that he will not be signing the bill. Aly-Khan, where does the bill go now? What process will unfold? Just to review some of those provisions.
So, I mean, what is extraordinary is you've had the entire process of parliamentary procedure overturned, seen as illegitimate, essentially, by these protesters because they feel that Parliament did not interrogate the bill, and nor did they try and amend it. So you've had a very interesting development in that regard, and I think, you know, it's going to be difficult for Parliament to regain its previous stature. I think there's got to be a genuine public participation. There's got to be a genuine debate and less of the name calling that seems to be everywhere at the moment. But I think you cannot expect to railroad a bill through as this previous attempt. That game is up, I'm afraid.
And the calls for President William Ruto to resign, how loud are those?
Well, I think, you know, that's a stretch too far. I think, you know, at this point in time, those calls are very political. I think what I've admired about this particular protest movement until yesterday has been its cross-tribal and cross-political. And I think these sorts of resignation calls at this stage are very premature.
Well, Aly-Khan, thank you so much for taking us through this one. Also, just painting a comprehensive picture for our benefit. That was Aly-Khan Satchu. He's CEO of Rich Management.